Hello, everyone, and welcome to an Americans for Limited Government live stream. We want to talk to you today about some very weird developments over at Microsoft. About 89% of people who have some sort of a word processing office management system on their computer use Microsoft. So most of us are familiar with it. If we don't use it, I know I use it every day. Rick, they have gone crazy woke. They have this spell checker, which is so bizarre. Do you want to just start off explaining what this spell checker does? And then I've got a couple videos that we can watch.
Sure. Everybody's familiar with the spell check on Microsoft Word. Everybody's familiar with the grammar check on Microsoft Word. But they've got a hidden feature that's embedded in Microsoft Word that may come to become surprising to people that's even there. Right now, it's the default is off, and it's something you can turn on if you want. But it's very easy for the default to become the standard of what they do. And what this little device does is it basically gives you culturally sensitive advice on how to write your stuff. And so it is culturally sensitive. So if you use a term like mankind, it will suggest humankind, things like that. And Microsoft makes no bones about it. They say that this is about trying to help people be more culturally sensitive, and it's part of their Office suite. Right now, like I say, the default is to have it turned off, but it's sitting there embedded. And in fact, it can easily become the default to have it turned on, at which point you'd have to go and figure out how to turn it off. And you'd get a nice little purple line underneath whatever you wrote that the wokies at Microsoft thought that there was something wrong with suggested politically correct terminology that you might want to insert so as not to offend anybody.
Well, let's watch a short clip from Fox News that they had this week focusing on what's going on now with Microsoft.
Expanded for people who are just hearing this story for the first time. Here's some of the switches we can expect to see. Mail carrier or postal worker instead of postman. Mankind, you just mentioned, is now humankind. Humanity, or humanity, we can use too. That's nice of them. This is a big one. Showgirl, no longer good. Now we're going to say dancer, performer, or performing artist. What a relief. Instead of mistress, this will be great. We'll have lover. Wow, I feel better already. Instead of manpower, workforce. Instead of heroine, hero. Some of these just absolutely ridiculous, but political correctness has now got into our keyboard, into our computer, into our phone. Scary.
This is a mechanism of mind control. And look, am I really bothered or staying up at bed at night because of any one of those examples? Of course not. But it's another example of the power that these tech titans have to control the entire mind of a society. And I think the fact that they're using it to advance this political agenda is something that we got to see through. Now, Brian, you've frequently heard from people over the last couple of years, great, if you don't like the product, stop using it. Well, I think that hasn't actually been realistic when you have network effects to these products. But at some point, that dam is going to break, and you're actually going to see somebody take them up on that offer and create new high-quality products in response.
So, Rick, I think with the last thing that subject issue expert said there at the end, there's network effects. I think that's sort of code for antitrust. Microsoft has embedded their products up and down throughout the chain there. So this is a real problem. Like, I may reject Microsoft because I don't like their wokeness, but it's very hard to do that because they've inserted themselves into every aspect of these sort of software management platforms.
Yeah, and the fact is that, yes, that is 100% correct. It's embedded into, essentially, whether you want it or not, it's embedded. And that's one of the challenges that you have when you have market dominance the way that Microsoft does. As you said up front, they have 89% of the market in terms of using the Microsoft Office suite, just as an example. One of the things that Mr. Ramaswamy talked about, I think is really, really, at least to me, interesting, is the fact that the individual examples may not seem egregious, but the acceptance of your software program, of a computer, of AI suggesting appropriate language, as designated by some people in Washington State, essentially allows for a minority to effectively, a small minority, to effectively change the way people think about things. And I'm going to use a simple example that makes it clear how language matters. In America, you have the word snow. Now you might use sleet and you might use slush and you can use some other things, but essentially we have snow. In Alaska, they have 6 different words for what we would call snow, depending on its consistency, depending on the fineness of it, depending on the temperature and the like. And because they live in a snow environment, whereas we live in an environment where snow is snow. And so there's no real differentiation. In language really drives how you think about things. It drives what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. It drives virtually our entire way of thinking. In fact, it's a pretty old concept and old as in, I mean, back to Plato, that language is what dominates thought rather than thought dominating language. And rational thought can be dominated by a certain type of language that you learn versus if you learn oral history, you look at things much differently. You don't have the same rational capacity. So that's from Eric Havelock back in the 1970s, talking about ancient cultures and Plato and defining Plato. So you get down to it, words matter. Microsoft is trying on a sub rosa basis to influence our world's language, influence American language, and in doing so, influence American thought. That's dangerous, and they can't be allowed to do it. And the fact is, they need to be subject to antitrust laws. Senate Judiciary Committee is looking at some antitrust legislation, and there's some specific language which should be included to incorporate the Microsoft Word and spreadsheet platforms, Excel platforms, to ensure that they are not actually creating using their platforms, their neutral platforms, to try to influence the way people do things and think about things.
Well, Rick, I want to also point out that 85% of the public sector government computers run using these Microsoft operating systems. So that's millions of our taxpayer dollars are really keeping this company, going. These are hugely popular in the public sector. Those are our tax dollars. Again, 85% of the public sector computers are using Microsoft products.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure. I'm thinking this along the lines of a First Amendment circumstance. But if you can imagine if if you're sending an email into or a Word document into a government computer, and they automatically subject it to the woke program, and use that woke program to determine your level of political correctness and your level of in terms of your social culture score, which is coming. You can just see this program being used by the government to try to censor thought and to discriminate against people based upon the words they use and Microsoft's definition of what's correct and what's incorrect. So there's just so many applications of this that just go well beyond. Here's what I'm just going to read you something that Microsoft said because I think it's really instructive on mindset. They say, and I quote, hold on. Microsoft understands that not every editor suggestion may be suitable for all users in all scenarios, the company told Daily Mail, the publication Daily Mail. That's why we let users be in control of their final output. How nice of them. Microsoft is taking our blank page that we're putting our thoughts down, and they're going to let us be in control of our final output. Imagine the audacity to even think that you shouldn't be. Imagine the audacity to think that you should have the power to censor people of their final output using your blank page software. That's the level. When you see what they said, it tells you what they're thinking. They believe they're being magnanimous by not just imposing their view of what the language ought to be onto their users. And when people feel they're being magnanimous to do that, guess what? That won't last very long. And so they've revealed actually the dark heart that they have related to this, because by saying that's why we let users be in control of their final output, they're really saying, and if you're not careful, we're not going to let you be in control of your final output. We will be the censors. We can be used by the thought police to impose language on people and change essentially what they communicate by virtue of a simple AI program, a simple program that's plugged into your computer, and there's not a darn thing you can do about it because it's embedded in your software. It's dangerous. And they admit what they're going to do. They admit the danger of it in their statement, inadvertently, but they admit it. So be afraid. And senators out there, we need to be contacting our U.S. senators and urging that the mind control, word control programming in Microsoft be turned off permanently, because no company should control the language of a nation and the language of the world. That's such enormous power that it's just astonishing. And given their market share, they effectively will control that language.
Rick, I want to share another short clip. This is from a YouTuber guy. It's a comedic look, but when you see the clip he uses, he's going to show us a clip from an actual Microsoft video that their sort of PR department put out. And you're going to think that it's a joke. So just stand by and I will get this video for you.
If you thought that people putting their preferred pronouns in their Twitter bio and email signatures was, well, a bit strange, Microsoft has taken things even further. And I'm sorry to have to keep saying this, but this video is real. It's not a parody making fun of wokeness. It is the wokeness.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kelly Gadilla. I'm a Caucasian woman with long blonde hair, and I go by she, her. I'm a product marketing lead here at Microsoft and co-host of the podcast Security Unlocked with this guy.
Yes, that would be me. Hello, everyone. I'm Nick Fillingham. I'm a Caucasian man with glasses and a beard. I go by he, him, and I'm a security evangelist here at Microsoft. We are so excited to be with you here today for...
All right, Rick. So you get the idea.
Yeah. Did he say he's a security evangelist? You know what he said? It's just, yeah. I don't understand why a person would have to identify themselves by their hair color, particularly a woman, since that's a rather transferable thing. It's transitional, we might say, but it's the definition of insanity, and quite honestly, it's what's happening in every college in America. So, when you look and you go on to somebody's LinkedIn page and it says, which is, by the way, owned by Microsoft, and people identify themselves as he, she, or she, she, whatever it is, her, she, or whatever it is. It's not her, she. If it was her, she, then they'd be a chocolate. But you get it. I can't even say it. But yeah, it's you have this weird kind of identifiers that are put up, and it's
well. The
bottom line is what we're allowing to have happen, and what Microsoft and others are promoting through this politically correctness run amok is a sense that they are doing you a favor by letting you know how they prefer to be called. And for the life of me, I don't know if I called somebody, hey, blonde woman with long blonde hair, hey, woman with long blonde hair, I think that'd be the height of rudeness. It's just bizarre.
Well, so that little video clip from Microsoft came out about 2 or 3 months ago, and they immediately got ridiculed and mocked on social media. And then Microsoft wrote on their blog, they tried to defend it, saying that their presenters on the video were asked to describe their physical features for blind people. like this blind people needed to know that they were hearing a Caucasian person with blonde hair. I don't know. Their explanation sounded even worse, like they just digging a hole.
Yeah. listen, when you look at absurdity like that, just understand, and back to the key point, these are the people who want to tell you how you should be described. These are the people who want to have your language dictated by their preferences, and think that you need to be essentially guided toward language preferences that they would choose to have. And it's one thing for, if they want to go off and show how woke they are by having weird descriptions of who they are. That's fine. That's their business. We got to laugh about it. The line is crossed when they start trying to impose it on us based upon embedded software that's inside your Microsoft Word, and that can be turned on literally with any update. And that's when it gets dangerous. And so just recognize Microsoft is like virtually every other tech company. They live awash in wokeness, but beware. If you start getting purple lines under your text when you're writing, some of the wokeness software has been turned on, and it's time for you to turn it off. But realize it's been turned on for everybody, and anything you say can be determined to be too woke for dissemination, and can be used against you. So this is dangerous. It's not what Microsoft's supposed to be. And for a company that didn't actually develop Windows, but instead borrowed it from Bill Gates, shall we say, or from Steve Jobs, shall we say, after Bill Gates visited Apple one day. It's mighty odd that they would then want to have intellectual property that imposes a worldview on people. So beware of it. It's dangerous. And quite honestly, Microsoft has gotten away, hasn't really seen much fire or ire aimed at them for their wokeness. We've talked about Amazon, we talked about Apple, we talk about the whole, Google, certainly Facebook, Twitter. We talk about all those different people, but we never think of Microsoft, because all Microsoft is it's the programs that run in the background. But now the programs that run in the background are being programmed to try to impose wokeness into your background, and may not affect people my age, but it will definitely affect people who are in the beginning stages of learning language, as they're told what language they can use and not, replacing the language they learn in their household with language approved by the censors at Microsoft.
I like what Paul Lunds says. He tells us, refuse to be woke, show them how ridiculous they are. Actually, Paul, I think that they expose themselves as ridiculous. All we're doing is sharing it with you, but through their own actions and products, they are exposing themselves to be completely ridiculous. And I just want to circle back to a point that Rick made at the very beginning, because some of you may be joining us halfway through. Microsoft has software installed in all of their spell check sort of networks that will identify when you're not using proper woke language, or if you're using terms that could be, separate out people by gender. They'll put a little purple line under the word, and they'll let you here's a suggested alternative word. Like, instead of saying mankind, we suggest you use humanity. Okay. And currently, it is not automatically uploaded or integrated into your Microsoft products. You have to go in on the back end and then opt into it, because I went into my Microsoft mail system to see what was going on, and it took me about 20 to 30 minutes. First of all, it was very hard to find, even though when I Googled it, it claimed that, it's so easy. Microsoft said, you just go here, here, and here, and boom, you can opt out of it or opt in, So it took me about 35 minutes of searching around. It was not easy to find. And then when I finally found it, Rick, it told me that I didn't have the authority to do it on my own. I had to get permission from the administrator of our network system. So that's somebody else in the office who has control. I wasn't able to opt in or opt out. That that was reserved for whoever is the administrator in your network. But it was really just not transparent at all what was going on back there. And so, Rick, I think the point you made earlier is spot on. Currently, it is not the default setting, but at any point, it could be the default setting. You know how Microsoft asks you to do regular updates on their software? At any point, they could integrate that and such that you have to then opt out. It's just not transparent in my experience.
Yeah, and so just expect, they're not putting it in, not spending the money to develop it, to not use it. Let's just be clear. That would be fiduciarily unsound. They're spending the money to use this. They have an intention to turn it on. They have an intention to force feed it to people. They have an intention to have woke companies be able to turn that on their employees, who then won't be able to turn it off for documents that they write. And so this is about controlling the mind. It's about controlling language. If you control the language, you control the people. And and that's why it's so dangerous. And once again, this is one of those things where Microsoft is insinuating itself into the woke debate, into the entirety of the social justice agenda debate. And it starts out with a few words where you say, "Oh, no harm, no foul," but soon it becomes you end up words being eliminated from the dictionary, eliminated from the lexicon, because they aren't viewed as being correct, and yet they happen to be accurate reflections, or they have the preferred word be something that's offensive to anybody who's thinking right, but it becomes the preferred word, the preferred noun, because it is in fact what is deemed to be politically correct. So this is a dangerous step forward by Microsoft. I would argue actually a step backward by Microsoft. But don't be lulled into complacency by the limited kind of almost, benign nature of what it would do now. Because the bottom line is they have the capacity to control language that your computer will put out. And in doing so, they've taken that blank sheet away from you. And they've taken it and they're saying, we're going to use your blank sheet and we're going to impose our cultural biases onto your blank sheet, so that you are then perceived to convey those biases yourself as if they're your own. And they're taking away your ability with this to actually be a free thinker. And what's more, they're going to ingrain this in your kids, and your kids will grow up not knowing alternative ways of describing things because they only have the Microsoft approved way to describe different subjects. And that's narrow, it's confining, and it is dangerous in terms of free speech and the ability to have free thought.
Rick, MarketWatch did a great story just a couple weeks ago. The headline, Microsoft has avoided U.S. antitrust scrutiny, but Europe is a different matter. So what's going on in Europe is their antitrust laws are different, and they're able to address some of these issues that we're dealing with here in the United States with Microsoft. But we want that same ability here. So that's what you said earlier. The U.S. Senate is looking at legislation that would give Congress more ability to sort of break up some of these antitrust issues related to Microsoft. Is that right?
Yeah, I understand. Microsoft, Congress makes laws; they don't execute them. But I'm not going to model anything after the European model. I think they're different, and actually, Europe goes way overboard in terms of regulation on speech. But from a standpoint of this particular notion and kind of the big tech's omnipresent ability to affect things simply with a tweak of a code, I think there is a lot of reason to want to break up these tech giants, including Microsoft. Microsoft now owns LinkedIn. They own, they're one of those companies that when a good idea comes out, they buy it, and they either bury it or they go and they integrate it into their system. And that's how they've operated, from day one, really. And so you end up with 3-4 companies that are dominant. And when they're all the same mindset, you end up with effectively a massive thought control mechanism that's directed at each of us. But truthfully, it's really directed at your kids, because kids who basically are finding their own way are malleable, much more malleable than formed adults. And as a result, this is not a transformation based on trying to get baby boomers to change the way change things. This is a transformation aimed at Gen Z, and even there's now a new generation behind them. I don't think it has a name yet, and it's about transforming the way they view things and transforming the way they talk about things. And they have enormous power, and corporations should not have that power. And that's why antitrust is important. And Microsoft should have to make a decision of what they want to be. But by turning a blank, I'm just going to say this once more, by turning the blank page on your screen into a proscriptive, which they will do, into a proscription for what can be written on that page, they have gone from being a blank page to an editor. And in doing so, it's every bit as pernicious as when Twitter or Facebook or Google say to people, or through YouTube, Google, say to people, your content doesn't meet our community standards. Because once Microsoft gets this thing up and running, they can review your written work and say, your written work doesn't meet our community standards. Please make the suggested changes in order to make it comply with what our product will allow you to do. That's what they're going for. That's what's going to happen. And just like with grammar, you sit there, you just click on it. People are going to want to just get the little lines out of their thing, and they're just going to go through and click, 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 click. And at which point they're going to be institutionalized language that would be rejected as ridiculous otherwise. I just
want to read the last bit here from Market Watch on this story, looking at some of the antitrust issues related to Microsoft. It says, like its big tech brethren, Microsoft for years has expanded its business reach through acquisitions in advertising and video games. And Rick, that gets to your point that this is largely targeted at our children too, because they're getting to our children through the video games. But over the past 18 months, the software behemoth has avoided the regulatory lawsuits and investigations that have ensnared the other big tech firms. Microsoft and its defenders attribute the white glove treatment by regulators to the company abiding by the rules after its tussle with the Justice Department more than 2 decades ago. But what we're seeing now, Rick, is that the Senate is taking another look. Maybe there needs to be some language in there to address some of these antitrust issues with Microsoft.
Yeah, and there is specific language that could be added in that would be very, I think would put Microsoft certainly on warning that they could be held accountable from an antitrust perspective related to their proscriptions on Microsoft Word and elsewhere. But I'm just going to provide a cautionary note on the antitrust stuff. We've been upfront about antitrust for a long time. Jeff Sessions, back when Jeff Sessions was Attorney General early on, and when he was Attorney General, I met with him. And one of the things that he asked was, Rick, what would you do about the big tech problem? And he was throwing out, the idea of making them a public entity, basically a public utility, which had some popularity among some people in the Trump world. And I told him, no, that wasn't the right way to go. When you make something a public utility, you basically make it a monopoly. And in doing so, you guarantee there's no innovation, and you guarantee that you're never going to have a better product developed because they'll be fighting against a monopoly. The right way to go would be to take companies like Google or Microsoft and break them up. And have their component parts compete against one another. And it was very simple. If YouTube is competing with Google for eyeballs, it's able to go and get partnerships with Microsoft or other companies. It's able to do things that a regular company would do. Then you've got an actual incentive for people to come up like Rumble to become part of a competition with Google, with YouTube. And so suddenly you end up with a competitive environment, and you have lots of other alternatives that grow up for all sorts of reasons, because technology or because of other opportunities. But when one platform like YouTube becomes so dominant that it really doesn't make sense, except for if it because of the various things they do, like deplatform Dan Bongino, or I guess demonetize Dan Bongino, things like that. That's when you get the rumbles coming up, is when they abuse that authority. But the fact of the matter is, we have a better product. We would have a better product, a better experience if they were competing. And the current situation doesn't create that competition and just actually discourages it. And that's the real reason for antitrust. Because if there's multiple YouTubes competing, then YouTube doesn't have the capacity to dominate and decide what works. Microsoft, in this instance, when they don't have 89% of the market, they don't have the capacity to compel 89% of the people to bow to their proscriptions, to their woke proscriptions. That's the danger of market dominance, beyond market dominance. It's not just dominance. It's like totally owning markets for certain communication.
Saturation. Is that the word?
But that was a conversation I had with Jeff Sessions a long time ago. This has been the position we've had for a while. I don't advocate a European style, which tends to be much more government run. I want to have competition. Any kind of antitrust needs to breed competition, marketplace competition, because marketplace competition breeds ideas, gives air, gives oxygen to new ways of doing things, and it is the way that you end up with things being developed and ways of doing things that we cannot imagine in 10 to 15 years. When you have market dominance with these various companies, innovation often gets shunned aside because they already have something that they're making money off of. And so innovation is an inconvenience, and the market never gets to test which way they want to go. It becomes a corporate decision. I believe innovation works because markets make perfect decisions. They decide what should work. They decide whether a Betamax or a VHS is the right tape for whatever reason, is the right system. We went away from film to digital cameras because the market said we wanted digital cameras. Everything, innovation is driven by market when allowed to. And this is an instance where Microsoft has taken a step too far and has shown that they need a little competition in their life in terms of the word processing space.
Rick, we are over 30 minutes in our discussion. Did you want to talk about what's happening with the Beijing Olympics, or do you want to leave that for another day?
Well, let's just do 2 minutes on it, because there's some things that are happening. Okay. Everybody's aware that Beijing, China, has been the communist Red Chinese have been at war with the United States for declared war since the 2000s. And they're being more bellicose than ever about Taiwan. They're in danger. They're at war with India right now in the Himalayas. They are advancing across the world, trying to, and really are engaged in real conflict against the U.S. So we recognize that. We know that. We also know that they abuse Christians. We know they abuse the Uyghurs, who are Muslim. We know they abuse the Falun Gong. We know they abuse minority populations in their own country to the full extent of any way you can define abuse, going all the way to not just killing people, but actually harvesting their organs, identifying people who have certain blood types and the like that are rare, and having wealthy people from around the world say, I need to get a heart transplant. They have who's ineligible and their slave population who would be a good donor. And guess what? That donor doesn't get to say so. So they're put into the knife, their heart is taken, they die, and that heart is put inside somebody else's body who has the money to buy it. That's what forced organ that's what that is. Forced organ transplants. That's what it looks like. Looks like Robin Cook's book Coma, which for those of you who haven't read it, is an old book. Tom Selleck's first role in a movie, by the way. But it is that's what it looks like. It's scary. It's a scary vision where the state owns your body. Well, they're hosting the Olympics, and there is no way they should be rewarded by having athletes show up. In the U.S., this is kind of to our own discredit, has said we're going to allow the Beijing Olympics. We don't want to participate officially, but we're going to have our athletes go, and we're going to allow, and NBC is going to go, and they're going to broadcast it. And basically, so China can put on a show saying how wonderful they are. And they're using this Olympics just like Hitler tried to use the 1936 Olympics. No difference. It's dangerous, and it's not well thought out. And now China is shutting down flights from the United States in terms of being able to get to China due to COVID. And so you have very few flights being able to go to places like Shanghai. And so there's a very real possibility that people aren't going to be able to even get to China, and may not be able to get out of China based on those kind of restrictions. So, folks, it's athletes should not be going to China for the moral reasons, but now we've got the practical reason that with COVID, we're basically going to be sending athletes over to an environment where a sick environment that puts them at risk, and then they come back here, bringing back more COVID, more disease. So there's lots of reasons to do this. It's a bad idea. NBC carries the Olympics, has a lot of money invested in it. And so contacting your NBC affiliate and telling them that that they should drop the Olympics for 2022 because of the slave ties in Beijing would be a moral and smart and correct thing to do if people are looking for something to do about the Beijing Olympics.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We are so grateful to have you as part of our team here, and we'd love to have more of you. If you aren't already subscribing to our YouTube channel, please go ahead and subscribe and hit the bell so that you get notified whenever we go live. And Rick, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, folks, it's your involvement really matters. We're about to engage in some really exciting projects, which we'll brief you on later. But the fact is, none of these projects are possible without your involvement, without your being engaged. Our goal is to increase the number of people engaged by 10 times this year, and that involves you. That's up to you. The people who are going to become more involved in the next year, I don't know who they are, but you do, because they're in your contact list. So share our stuff and subscribe if you haven't. Subscribe here on the YouTube channel or on the Rumble channel. Subscribe, get so if you're a follower, you're going to get notifications if you just click the bell thing and make it all work. So you know how to work this system better than I do. I'm a Luddite. So just do what you need to do. Bottom line is, hopefully you like the content. We're trying to make it better every day. And Catherine does a great job on it. And we're blessed to have her leading the show here. Thank you very much, folks.
Thanks, everyone.